Back to the question of micro and macroeconomics with a general remark. We talked on different occasions about Keynes, and Keynes was kind of important in terms of a change, overall change of the orientation in economics, that we actually find an orientation that is more oriented on something that is going on the macro level. But before, meaning the classical economics, the neoclassical economics, was always linked to the idea or to questions of macroeconomics as well. Even if we look at Adam Smith and Bentham as main actors on the scene, we say they looked at individuals. It is not the butcher who looks after your well-being. He or she produces for himself, is active, is entering into a competitive setting. Now, these different actors are engaging with each other as individuals. The overall idea of the entire setting was, as I said, with Bentham, everybody is looking after him herself, and this at the end leads to the greatest happiness of all. This was the idea of the classical economics. And they said, we talked in the workshops about it, one of the core issues is equilibrium. At the end, the market will solve the problem of possible conflicts. Supply-demand, depending on a tail of other things, or influenced by a tail of other things, will lead to the overall equilibrium. In simple terms, at the end, everything will be fine. We don't have to worry about anything. If there is a crisis, it's only a short-term crisis, and it will come back to the equilibrium where it is feasible and where everybody is happy again. But if there is a crisis, we have unemployment possibly. That's a short period of time. We will come back to unemployment at a later stage. It's only for a short period of time. Soon it will go back to the state of equilibrium. Everybody gets a job. Now what Keynes said is not that we have now to deal with macroeconomics. This was done before. But what he said is now we have to worry about the macro level, because the individuals, the competition between individuals, will not solve the problems we have, will not automatically come to this point of an equilibrium. Which means as well that the shift of attention, the attention, the focus of attention shifted. It was not the individual profit, the profit of individuals, of individual enterprises that matters, and that automatically leads to an increase of the GDP, which automatically makes everybody being better off. But what we find now is the idea we have to look at this entire economy and look if and how it functions or does not function. So this is one of the reasons behind coming back to GDP as an aggregate figure. And this aggregation process, we will come back to it later, meaning next time, the 5th lecture. This is very important. We are looking at the aggregate. We are not looking at the individuals producing. The aggregate as a matter of the final goods and services produced within an economy, usually the national economy, within usually 1 year. This within one economy makes sense. We are dealing with national economies. Within 1 year makes sense because we have to set some limits. It's a kind of pragmatic thing. We usually take 1 year. It's not too long. If we take 5 years, it's a long period of time. We are interested in influencing, in observing what is going on there today. We can't say, well, let's look at what happened in 5 years. We look back and then we develop new policies. This is something we do as well. 5 years plans, we have them in France. I don't know, we have planning here in China. You have had them in the USSR. You have them everywhere. But now we are looking for some reasonable short-term period. And then, of course, if we take what we sometimes do, 3 months, a quarter of a year, this is too short. In a quarter of a year, there is no real trend. It's too short to say, well, this is the future development. There may be short-term effects that influence things and that make it difficult to say, well, but this is the trend, an overall trend going up, going down. So we usually, for more or less pragmatic reasons, we take this overall setting of 1 year, one national economy, and this matters. Now what we have as well, as I said, it's the final goods and services produced. If you produce the final good of a car, I'm not interested in what you are producing. I'm not interested in what you are producing. I'm not interested in what you are producing, although we need it, she needs it to produce the car. But you do not produce the final products. You produce the tires, you produce the steering wheel, and you produce the brakes. Giving it to her, and she produces the final product, meaning the car. This is what counts. Aggregation. The final product. The final product is the car, not the brakes. Can you do anything with brakes? No. You need a car to be able to put them into the car and then say, then they make sense. The brakes as such are pretty useless. It is a figure, aggregation, that does not say anything on wealth. We talked about it. It is a very difficult question at the end of the day. And there is a link, a possible link between the two. If you have a higher GDP, it's simply you have more resources and you can do more things with it. You can build more houses, more accommodation, better accommodation. You may have a better health system and that. But at the same time, this does not say anything about everybody being better off. It's again a difficult question. because you may simply have a high GDP, but everything goes into another country. You may have a high GDP, but only 3 people get the profit out of it. They gain from it. The others do not gain anything from it. So in this way, we have to be careful in what we are talking about. As well, as we will see later, it's only looking at the quantity. It does not look at what we are producing and how we are producing things. It is looking at concrete items. In this way, this is what we use. We use the shoes, we use the chair, we use the rucksack, whatsoever. We are not using what is going into it. But at the same time, as I frequently said, and I repeat it again and again, we are not looking at the use value, but we are only looking at the exchange value, meaning expressing this in terms of money, in terms of a value we put to it. GDP, gross domestic product. Now there is another figure, that is the GNP. And the GNP is related to the GDP, but it is a different figure. And you simply have to learn what it is. It's pretty boring to learn these things, but it's necessary. So the GDP is the GNP is the GDP minus the income earned by foreigners in the reference country. Basically, they earn it here, they go home, and there is nothing left in the country. Of course, you worked as foreigner here. In this way, there is something left in the country. Whatever you produced or the service you delivered is remaining here. But in terms of the money effect, in terms of the effect in the budget, it's going out. But there is something coming back. And that is what people of this country, of the reference country, being in China, we talk about China, what Chinese people earn in other countries. Again, and there you have this, the two sides are complementing each other. What the foreigner earns here goes out. What the Chinese or the person, the national here, earns in another country goes back into the GNP here. So this is a very important point you have to keep in mind in terms of a difference. The one thing is the overall product, the other thing is looking at as well at the income of people working. Foreigners here, Chinese in this case, outside. In both cases, GDP, but as well at the end of the day, GNP, we are looking at consumption. When we are looking at these macro figures, we are looking at consumption, the investment. Consumption is, in this case, what you spend and enjoy, or don't enjoy, but you need it for whatever purpose. The investment, we come back to factors of production. Whatever you invest to set up your enterprise is investment. Then we have government spending. It is building roads, building tunnels, building schools, universities, military expenses, services, investing in services, whatever is needed there. And then we have the net export. Meaning the net export in the sense of what is bottom line, what is under the line, left after relating exports and imports. Usually any economy exports something, sells products outside of the country, and at the same time they import something from other countries. The net export is what is really exported when I take both figures together. Definitional questions, we simply have to know them, we have to keep them in mind, and then we have to make some exercises and look at questions. In this case, an Irish citizen buys an automobile produced in Great Britain by a German company. Now we are looking what happens to the GDP, gross domestic product, to the GNP, the gross national product, and the net exports. It's a kind of simple and simplified thing because we only have one car. This is sold. We are not looking at the overall balance. We just deal with one product that is produced and sold. Step by step exercise. We talked about different actors on the market. Of course, the very simple thing is we have a producer and a buyer. Somebody produces the car and somebody buys the car. So far, so good. So far, very simple. If you go back to the questions, the question is getting a little bit more difficult because it is an Irish citizen, a British and German are involved. It's produced in Great Britain, but the company is German. So who is actually relevant here? And it's this kind of, especially now in the beginning, to explain it, it's this tedious process of going through it step by step. Is there any government involved that is relevant for this calculation, for answering this question? The English? Who is interacting on the market? There is no government. There are people from different nationalities. This is, of course, relevant, but as government, it doesn't play a role. And it does not play a role in what we are looking at if there are, for instance, if it's free trade, or if there is a certain tax they have to pay importing, exporting. Of course, these are government activities. But looking at GDP, GNP, and net exports, simply at the development, this doesn't matter in terms of this interaction. It matters indirectly, but not directly. Now we have factor markets. Do they play a role? Does it play a role, the price of a robot in Great Britain for the German enterprise? Not in this calculation, because we take this for granted and we are looking at the final product, which is the car. Of course it plays a role, because it may be that the robots, the machines, the raw material are very cheap in Great Britain.
No, you sure that Irish people, he live in England or he live in Irish?
Irish. Good question. I don't know. I don't know where this Irish person lives. I assume he lives in Ireland.
But if Irish people live in Irish, then from England to Irish, they need to export.
Yeah.
England export to Irish.
Exactly. It's the question actually doesn't say it. It's the presumption. We assume that it's an Irish citizen who actually lives in Ireland and that the car is exported. So you are right in asking it. It could be an Irish citizen buying the car in England and living in England, driving it in England. But we assume it's an Irish citizen and the Irish are very homeborn. He lives in Ireland, I guess. So wages, profit, interest, rent doesn't really play a role. It plays indirectly a role, but this is the point with aggregation. We are not looking at the individual items, but we are looking at the final product, which is the car, sold and bought by one person, by one enterprise. That's here, market for goods and services. This German company sells it, produces it, and sells it. Market for goods and services. And here we have the household. So you see it's all going in different directions. The household, the Irish citizen, actually buying it. Step one. If you have such a question, who is doing what? Who is really relevant for this final product? And it is really important to go through every step. Actually, if it would be a serious situation now, we would have to go to this Irish person and say, where are you actually living? Because many people are living not in their country. They are citizen of, an Irish citizen, may live in Great Britain, may live in Germany, may live in China. All this matters. But we assume good Irish citizen lives in good old Ireland, Emerald Island. So what do we do next? We are interested in the aggregate figures, which is in this case very simple, because the aggregation is only one car that matters. At the same time, we are interested in three figures: net export, GNP, and GDP. Nothing else. We are not interested in the import and not interested in the export. But to know the net export, we have to know the export and the import. Otherwise, we cannot calculate the net export. And basically, you take the question, You build your table, you draw your table, and then you fill in boxes. When I studied economics and we wanted to do something, there was always the good or not good excuse. I can't join you, I have to calculate my boxes. I had to do my homework and I have to do these calculations. So one thing is going through different options now. Great Britain's net exports increase, getting something out. The GNP and GDP are unaffected because it's German enterprise and it's the Irish, so forget the Brits. The export, of course, not. Then the Germany's GNP increases, Ireland's net export decrease, and Ireland's GNP and GDP are unaffected. Go through the boxes I showed you before and check it. And then you may come up with an alternative and say, as the first one was not correct, I look at another one and say GB's net exports, GNP and GDP increase. Because that's where actually things happen in Great Britain. Exporting stuff, it's produced there, everything fine. Germany's GDP increases. And the Irish are a little bit in a bad position. The net export decrease, they don't sell anything, and the GDP is unaffected. Now there is again one assumption we make. There is only this one car mentioned. So we assume that the Irish do not export anything. So they only import the car and they do not export anything to another country. Assumption. Because it is not mentioned, it doesn't exist. It's like little children. They close the eyes and say, you are not there, because they don't see it. If we don't see the imports or exports from Ireland, we say they don't exist in this example. Still, it sounds a little bit weird, so we check the next, going back to the table and say, GB's, Great Britain's net exports, GNP and GDP are unaffected. We have had this kind of scenario before because Great Britain is not really the point of reference. It's in Ireland where the car is bought. It's the German company. So forget the Brits. Germany's GNP increases, Ireland's net export decrease, and the GDP and GNP fall because they only pay for this car. Don't buy cars, it's dangerous for the economy. Then we come finally to the solution that the net exports and GDP increase in Great Britain. This is really what happens in terms of the production and in terms of the change where does something go. Germany's GNP increases because it is this German enterprise, and in this understanding, in this example, we say it is the German enterprise working with German workers and. So this is here the concept of a German enterprise. Of course, there may be another thing, that you have actually British workers working there. We are simplifying things. Ireland's net exports decrease. Again, they don't export anything. They only import this car. They don't export anything. And indeed Ireland's GDP and GNP are not affected. They buy this stuff. That's it. They are not, there's nothing happening further with it. Is that so far clear? It's simply a tedious work you have to go through, look at the boxes, put everything into the box, think about it, what really happens, look at the definitions you have. Now, as I said, life is simple, but we should not think it is really as simple as we would like to see it. Because, of course, it is not the British economy that simply produces one car and exports the one car to Ireland, and this is the overall process. Britain produces many products, not only one car, but I don't know how many hundreds and thousands of cars. They produce furniture, they produce services, houses, clothes, computers, and water or something else to drink. And of course, they keep some stuff there and export some other part of the stuff. Now, they do not export everything they produce into the one country. They export it into different countries. And as much as they produce and export, in other countries we find the same thing. In other countries, things are produced and being exported, and part of it is exported to Britain, to Great Britain. This is the fundamental question, if you want. Where does all this happen and where does it all end in terms of balancing things, in terms of putting things together into the different positions? Now, there is an additional difficulty. We are not dealing with two countries, but we are dealing with many countries. Great Britain may export some of the products to Ireland, but they may export some of the products to Ireland, and Ireland sells them on to China. And before they sell them to China, they buy some other stuff from France, assemble it, bring it together, and they don't sell directly what they bought in Great Britain, I think, was it? Yeah. They don't sell what they bought there as such to China, but combine what they bought in Great Britain and in France, build something new, and move it on to China, sell it there. And then we have a difficult question that is implied. We talked about the example here of a car. And then the question is a car always the same car? If you have the same car, the same make, the same engine, the same color, the same everything, is it the same car? If I ask this way, you can assume it's not the same car. The same car may be, in economic terms, a different thing. And we speak of capital goods if the car is not the final product. If the car is used for producing something else. If I buy the car, enjoy driving for the weekends and in the evenings and whenever I just enjoy driving and moving around, private joys makes me happy, supposedly, as Bentham says. That's my thing. It's a private good. It's the final. It's just it. That's the car. If I use the car for business and say, actually, I don't like driving at all, but I use this car and use it as a taxi. The car is not the final product, but the car is an input into the production of my service, meaning of the taxi service. This is a difference. As I said, final products. It's not the product as such, but it is what goes into it before I come to the final product. By and large, you can say the final product is what is consumed. Of course, the car, my business car, goes into it. I could not drive a taxi without having a car. So in this sense, it is there. It is part of driving you after you, if it's a taxi, or if it's a Uber taxi or whatsoever, you call me, I drive you there. And of course, I won't say, I just drive you there, give me a fiver. But I have, in the long run, I want to have the money for my car back. But this is exactly this process of aggregation. It goes into it without that I calculate it immediately as part of it, saying it is immediately I have to get the money back now from you. Now this is a little bit a tricky question on occasions, just to make you aware of it, that we are not only talking about models. It's a little bit a tricky question when you come to taxation issues and you come to legal issues. What is if I buy the car as private person? This is actually, I think, with Uber a huge problem in law and taxation and stuff. I buy the car, it's my private car, but I use it for business. What happens with taxation? Is it a business car? Is it a private car? The taxation I have to pay for the two different kinds of car is different. If it's a business car, if it's a private car. And of course, it's different from country to country, from setting to setting, maybe even from province to province. The other thing is, relevant for finance and relevant for accounting, usually I can use my car, if I have a private car, I can use it to some extent for business. Or the other way around. I buy the enterprise car and I can go home with it because overnight nobody needs it. So I take the car with me home, drive home with it. It is an enterprise car, and there is a certain allowance for private cars using for business and the other way around, or the other way around, that I can use the car in different ways as business car and or as private car. I emphasize this to make you aware of, we are dealing in economics with models. A strict model. Business car, no business car, we are not interested in anything in between. Final product, non-final product. That is what is interesting us when we do our calculations. But we know that we are not working in a vacuum. We know that people use their private cars for business and use their business cars for private purpose. So we have to be careful when we look at the definitions, because sometimes this, for instance, makes as well a difference when it comes to comparison, international comparison. So that's the break.